Hi, my name is Jacob, and this is my Journey in Truth video newsletter for February 7, 2018. If you're watching this video through my Instagram account, please be sure to copy and paste the web link below to be navigated to my Facebook page, Journey in Truth, where you can watch the full featured video. So the topic for today's newsletter is, does God only love people? Question mark. Does God only love people? So we're going to explore that today. Before I do that, I just want to quickly recap what we've learned thus far. So this past week, we've learned who the Israelites are. We've learned some of their ancient history. We learned a little bit about the history between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And I presented you with the UNESCO report by the United Nations confirming that the Egyptians were a black race, and therefore I reasoned, based on all the evidence, that the Israelites were also a black race. Even more than that, I confirmed that Jesus Christ is indefinitely a black man through the book of Revelation. And then yesterday we learned about the Ten Commandments. So that's what we've learned thus far. So today, my objective today is to establish that God is not all loving. In fact, God cursed the Israelites considerably for not following his commandments. And we'll review that in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. But before I do that, I want to preface today's teaching by a lengthy conversation I had with a Mormon today. This gentleman is an executive level leader for a major global construction firm that I randomly met today at Starbucks, and we spoke for at least an hour. And I asked him numerous questions about the Mormons' view on the Holy Bible, eternal life, and so on and so forth. And there was one area we had disagreement, and the disagreement was he kept going back to the idea that God is only all loving and merciful. And I cited scriptures to him confirming that he's not all loving, but he still disagreed with me based on all the teachings in the New Testament. So similarly, you find that within Christianity today, leadership tends to focus significantly on the bright side of God, that he's all loving. And that's typically what I hear in a lot of the sermons. What else? Prosperity preaching. I think that's, what's his name? Joel Osteen. That's his strategy in presenting the gospel. But what I will establish today, and this is just in the book of Deuteronomy, there are numerous scriptures, hundreds of them, where they establish that God also has this disciplinary action side of him, and some might argue he's ruthless. And you read about some of these things, you can't believe this is God. Really, this is the all-loving God? So I'm trying to put things in the proper perspective by educating you on the fact that God is really hard. In fact, in the book of Revelation, when Jesus comes back, he's going to rule all the nations with an iron rod. And that's a very good example of him, meaning he's going to be very harsh on the nations. And, he's not all loving. He's going to rule them with an iron rod. When I hear the term iron rod, I'm thinking, rough times ahead. Worse than, like, for example, Hitler. He ruled the Jewish people, the Ashkenazi Jews, he ruled them with an iron rod. I mean, think about all the things they went through. When I think of the term "I ruling with an iron rod," and he says he's going to destroy all the nations, Jesus says this in the book of Revelation. Here, let me quote you the verse. Just give me 1 second. And this is in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, verse 27. And he says, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces, even as I myself have received authority from my Father. He's saying, as when earthen pots are broken in pieces. What do you think that means? What do you think he's saying? He's saying, even as I myself have received authority from my Father, he's saying, I've received authority from my Father to rule these nations with an iron rod, as when earth pots are broken in pieces. This is coming from Jesus. So again, I'm digressing now. I'm going to come back to the book of Deuteronomy. And I'm not going to read all these curses. There are too many. This is, let's see, from Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verses 15 through 68. So I'm not going to go through all these, but there are some I'm going to highlight right now. That's my goal right now. So verse 15, he says, "But it shall come to pass that if you will not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." I'm going to paraphrase these for the sake of time. He's saying they're going to be cursed or damned in the city, in the field. He's saying in their cattle, anywhere they go, they're going to be cursed through pestilence. That he would send them to other nations. They would be removed to other kingdoms of the earth, and they would be destroyed. He's saying that he would smite them with scabs, and oh man, this is. I mean, you read this and you can't believe this is God, that God would do these things. And then he says, now this is confirming. I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to read these verses that are applicable to proving that the modern day, the so-called black people, the Negroes, which are generic terms, when their real identity is they're Israelites. They're from the different tribes of Israel. Now I'm going to prove it to you. He says in book 25, he says they would be removed into all kingdoms of the earth. All kingdoms, okay? And then he says in verse 30, he says, "Thou shalt betroth a wife," meaning to the men, you're going to have a wife. But he's saying, "Another man shall lie with her." You'll build a house, but you won't dwell in it. You'll plant a vineyard, but you won't gather the grapes thereof. This is what it was like for them to be living as in slavery, as slaves. And then he says in verse 32, "Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people," another race. He says, "And thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in my hand." What he's saying is that their kids would be given unto another race, and they would cry. They'd basically be crying, and their eyes would fail them all the day long. And he's saying, "There shall be no might in thy hand." He's referring to no economic or military might in their hand. They're helpless. There's nothing they can do. Now I'm going to go all the way down to verse 45. He says, "Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee till you be destroyed, because you didn't hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes when he commanded thee." Now, in verse 48, he says, "Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee." He's saying you're going to serve them in hunger, in thirst, and in nakedness. This is what it was like for these slaves to be serving for the entire white race. Now, when you think of slavery, many people think of the United States, but you may or may not know this, but all the nations conspired against the Israelites and took them as slaves. And I'll name the nations to you. So within the white race of nations, it's more than the United States. You had the United Kingdom, you had France, you had Spain, you had Portugal, you had the Netherlands, you had Belgium, you had Germany, you had even China, India, who else? In Saudi Arabia. And these are, I didn't list all of them, but these are the major ones. Saudi Arabia, by the way, they have the longest standing slavery trade in the world, spanning more than 1,300 years. In fact, today, officially, they have 500,000 black slaves. Unconfirmed, I don't know how many. They've actually legalized slavery in Saudi Arabia. But I mean, Saudi Arabia, wow, the Saudi Arabians, they have had an extensive slave trade spanning over 1,300 years. But now I'm digressing. So let me come back to verse 48. He says, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger, in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee. When you think about putting a yoke of iron around thy neck, which he said in verse 48, which race of people have you seen that applied to? If you just Google the term yoke and neck, you'll see numerous images of black people in slavery with these huge iron yokes around their head that God prophesied would only happen to them. You haven't seen no other race of people in the world taken into slavery and having yokes around their necks. So far, everything that I've read has applied to the black race of people. And then in verse 49, he says, the Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Some people believe that, interpret this as being the United States, but it's actually Spain. Spain had a huge slavery trade. In fact, Santa Claus, he began in Spain. The whole tradition with Santa Claus, but I'm digressing. I'll put that in another video, guys. But so this is referring to Spain. Let me see. And then he says in verse 64, listen to this one. He says, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from one end of the earth even unto the other. And there shalt thou, meaning you, serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, even wood and stone. So he's saying, number one, he would scatter them among all races of people, from one end of the earth onto the other. And you look at the so-called black people, that's what's happened to them. They've scattered throughout the entire world. It's very different than, like, say, the Assyrians. I know we're scattered. And there are other nations, well, you'll make the argument that, they're scattered too. But when you combine all of the curses, and again, I only read you a few of them. When you combine all the curses that he put upon them and the slavery and the captivity, this clearly, from my standpoint and other people's standpoint, it applies to the black race of people for all the reasons I've argued thus far. And, another interesting point God makes here in this verse, he says, and this is in verse 64, when he says he would scatter them amongst all people, listen to what he says. There thou shalt serve other gods. Okay? He says other gods, meaning not him. which neither you nor your fathers have known. These would be new gods that weren't established at this time. This is before Jesus even came. And what are these gods? He's saying even wood and stone. So when you think about Islam, they worship the Kaaba stone. It's a black stone, and it's in one of their holy mosques in I think it's in Saudi Arabia. I forget if it's it's in Mecca. Excuse me, it's in Mecca. And you've probably seen the people. They go they come from all over the world, and I think I think they call it the Hajj. It's like once a year, I think. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm referring to. And you'll see people, thousands of them, all encircling this black stone and worshiping this stone, the Kaaba stone. And this is a god. The God of Islam is a totally different God. He's not the same God of the Israelites. God's confirming that here. And then he says even wood. So I described stone, now wood. When you think about wood, what comes to your mind? Which God is worshipped that's a God of wood? The God of Christianity. The so-called Jesus Christ of the Roman Catholic Church. Please understand that the God of these Israelites is a different God versus the God of the Roman Catholic Church and in Christianity. And that's what I'm unraveling here to you in all these videos. And I'm making an argument confirming that, not of my opinion, but confirming that through history and through all the scriptures in the Bible, through all the books in the Bible, that the God of the Israelites is a different God versus all these other religions in the world, including Christianity. So let's circle back to my opening statement, having to do with my conversation with the Mormon, who kept insisting that God is all loving, and that's all God is. He doesn't hate people, and I don't know what your opinion is. I'd love to hear your feedback and your viewpoints on all this information, but God is not all loving. Sure, God is, in verse here. Let me pull this up really quick. This is Exodus 20, King James versions. So when God gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, I'm going to jump down to verse 5. He says, he's referring to these other gods. He says, "Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God." He says, "visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generations of them that hate me." He means cursing the kids, the children, up to 4 generations for the actions of their fathers. To me, that's not all loving. That's not all loving to me. But then listen to what he says in the following verse. He says, "And showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments," right? So God is not all loving. And I remember there are 68 verses in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28. And I only went through just a few of the curses that he gave them. Some of them, I can't believe. You read some of these curses that he put upon them, and you'll have a hard time believing that God is all loving. And don't forget the verse I quoted you about Jesus in ruling with an iron rod, and this was in Revelation chapter 20, verse 27, where he says, "And he will shepherd them with a rod of iron, and shatter them like pottery." I'm sorry. Let me. Yeah. Okay. "And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter shall be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father." Meaning that's how he's going to be ruling the nation. So what did I establish here? I established that God is not all loving. And this is not my opinion. It's this disciplined side of God, this some would call ruthless side of God, is is evident throughout the Bible. And it's just all the more reasons to follow his commandments and keep his commandments. That's why he says the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. Here, let me see. What verse was that? The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. That's in Proverbs verse 9, chapter 10. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. He says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. So, anyhow, guys, I really hope that this video has added tremendous value to your life. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to comment below. And as always, thank you for watching. Take care, and God bless you.